They said he ran the Mafia like a Sunday church, calm, polite, and always collecting his donations. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true gangster stories told like bedtime confessions. Brooklyn, 1920s. While most gangsters shouted their power, Joe Profaci whispered his. He wasn't the man who kicked down doors, he was the man who owned the keys. Born in Villabate, Sicily, he came to America with nothing but a cross around his neck and a promise to build a kingdom without blood on his shoes. He opened an olive oil company, Mafia Imports. The bottles carried his name into every Italian kitchen, but behind those labels was a network of loyalty. Priests, shopkeepers, politicians, all spoke softly when Joe's name came up. He prayed before every meal and before every meeting. Violence, he once told a young associate, is for men who run out of ideas. Yet beneath that calm exterior, he was building something colder, a family bound by faith, fear, and finance. And as the streets changed, so did the man behind the prayers. He was about to prove that the deadliest weapon in the Mafia could be silence itself. They said Joe Profaci's smile could bless or bury a man. He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse, but when he spoke, even killers listened. In his modest Brooklyn home, the scent of olive oil and incense filled the air. His wife, Nina, ran the household like a convent, while Joe hosted priests and businessmen over quiet dinners. He'd pour the wine himself, steady and patient, as if sealing confessions instead of deals. His children grew up thinking their father was just a successful importer. Only later did they learn that every shipment that came through the docks carried more than olive oil, it carried respect. In the old country, respect meant survival. In America, it meant power without fingerprints. Keep your head down, he'd tell his nephews. The loud ones die first. He saw the streets changing, hot-blooded young men chasing headlines, while he built an empire in whispers. He paid his taxes, funded churches, donated to charities, and the city repaid him with silence. But even saints have shadows. Because while Joe was building faith in the daylight, at night he was baptizing soldiers into a different kind of brotherhood. And soon, that brotherhood would make him untouchable. Brooklyn, late 1930s. The Great Depression had broken men, but Joe Profaci was just getting started. While others fought for scraps, he built alliances, patient, invisible, and profitable. At the docks, his olive oil crates moved faster than anyone's. Longshoremen said they belonged to God, meaning Joe's hand was in them. Inside those shipments hid more than oil, cigarettes, liquor, even narcotics, but everything flowed through prayer, paperwork, and persuasion. He didn't gamble or drink. He met rivals in restaurants, not alleys. He dressed like a parishioner, not a kingpin. His secret? He never looked like the threat. One night, at a quiet Brooklyn cafe, a young soldier asked, "Joe, how do you stay on top without blood?" Profaci smiled faintly. "You don't need to kill when everyone owes you a favor." By the 1940s, his influence stretched from New York to Chicago, touching every Italian household through Mafia Imports. Each bottle of oil became a calling card, clean business masking sacred loyalty. And when the Mafia families gathered to form the National Commission, Joe sat at the table, not for his muscle, but for his mind. He was the quiet one among wolves. And quietly, he was becoming the most powerful Don nobody feared enough to betray, yet. By the 1950s, Joe Profaci's empire looked cleaner than a priest's collar. He was the olive oil king, a businessman, philanthropist, and Sunday church donor. But behind every blessing lay a balance sheet, and every handshake came with a silent tax. He ruled with an elegance no other boss could match. Where others demanded loyalty with bullets, Joe collected it with blessings. Every soldier, bookmaker, and smuggler under his flag paid the Profaci tax, a piece of every job, every hustle, every pocket. He called it dues for the family. And if someone questioned it, he'd simply smile and ask, "You don't love your family?" He hosted picnics for his men, full of wine, food, and laughter, moments that looked holy from the outside. But everyone knew, missing that picnic was as dangerous as crossing a saint. Law enforcement saw a businessman. The church saw a benefactor. And his rivals? They saw a man whose calm could smother you faster than a gun ever could. God made the world, Joe once said. I just organized the neighborhood. But perfection never lasts. Because under that polished calm, a storm was beginning to form, and it was coming from inside his own family. It started small, a whisper in the back of a Brooklyn bar. Some soldiers said the dues were too high. Others muttered that Joe was giving too little, taking too much, and hiding behind the church while his men bled for pennies. The discontent had a name, Joey Gallo. Young, loud, and fearless, the exact kind of man Profaci had always warned against. Gallo and his brothers didn't believe in silent loyalty. They believed in power with noise. And that noise began echoing through the streets. At first, Joe ignored it. He thought rebellion would burn itself out. But when a few of his trusted capos started missing meetings, he knew this was no ordinary drift, it was a quiet revolt. Tell them, he said one evening, calmly spooning soup at dinner, that I forgive ambition, until it gets expensive. Behind the serenity, paranoia crept in. He began moving meetings, switching cars, avoiding phones. Every prayer before dinner lasted a little longer. The man who once ruled through faith now ruled through fear of betrayal, not from strangers, but from the men who once kissed his ring. He didn't know it yet. But the Gallos were about to turn his sacred family into a battlefield. By the early 60s, the walls were closing in. The FBI had begun tapping phones, flipping low-level soldiers, and tailing every olive oil truck that left Joe's warehouses. Agents called him the Phantom Don, too clean to catch, too quiet to accuse. But inside his circle, trust was cracking like old glass. Informants whispered, the boss don't trust no one, not even the priest. Joe stopped attending public mass. He prayed at home, alone, the curtains drawn, his rosary trembling slightly in his fingers. He told his wife, they're listening through the walls. She smiled sadly, thinking it was age. But he wasn't wrong, the Bureau was listening, every word cataloged, every silence noted. The Gallos had declared open war. Kidnappings, revenge hits, extortion, the Profaci family was tearing itself apart. Joe's answer wasn't bullets. It was patience. He started holding meetings on fishing boats, drifting just far enough offshore that microphones couldn't reach. God gives me storms, he muttered once, to see who still sails with me. But storms wore down even saints. And as the FBI's files grew thicker, Joe's health, and his faith, began to fade. He could silence men. But he couldn't silence time. The calm empire that once ran on faith and fear was now drowning in chaos. Joe Profaci's name, once spoken in whispers of respect, was now being shouted in police reports and newspaper headlines. The Profaci Gallo War had turned Brooklyn into a chessboard soaked in betrayal. His olive oil trucks were raided. His men defected to rival crews. Even his so-called friends in the commission began to distance themselves. No one wanted to stand next to a Don under investigation, or one dying slowly from within. Joe tried to broker peace, summoning capos and priests to a secret dinner meeting. He told them, quietly, you cannot build heaven if your house is on fire. But the younger men were already chasing their own empires, louder, faster, bloodier. That night, as he sat alone in his study, cigar untouched, reports of another ambush reached him. He didn't curse, didn't shout. He just closed his eyes and whispered, so this is what loyalty costs. He had survived decades without a single conviction. But this was a different kind of sentence, a slow, public unraveling. The Godfather before the Godfather was becoming a ghost in his own kingdom. He never saw the inside of a prison cell, not officially. But for Joe Profaci, his final years were a kind of confinement all the same. The disease eating at his body did what no rival, no bullet, no FBI file ever could, it slowed him down. He spent most days at his Florida estate, staring out over the water, rosary in hand. The once calm Don now battled something deeper than the law, time itself. Visitors came less often. Old friends were dead, in hiding or wearing wires. Even the church, once his shield, began keeping its distance. He'd walk the garden at dusk, whispering prayers only he understood. He still read business reports. Habits never die, but the numbers no longer mattered. One evening, when a doctor told him to rest, Joe smiled faintly and said, "I've been resting my whole life, doctor. That's how I got this far." He was surrounded by comfort, palm trees, quiet nurses, the hum of the sea, yet it all felt like a gilded cell. The silence he once controlled now ruled him. The man who built his empire on faith and patience was learning the hardest truth of all. You can command fear, but you can't negotiate with time. By 1962, Joe Profaci had become a legend no one dared speak about too loudly. He was frail now, thinner, slower, his once sharp eyes softened by time. But his name still lingered in every corner of Brooklyn like the smell of incense after Mass. Younger bosses studied his methods. They called him the original Godfather, the man who ruled through order, not chaos. His olive oil business, once just a front, had become a symbol: clean hands, dirty power. Even those who hated him admitted it. Profaci didn't need bullets to win. He used patience like a weapon. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, he'd sit with Nina on the porch and ask, "Do you think they'll remember me as a sinner or a saint?" She'd smile gently. "Maybe both. But they'll remember you." He watched the world change: louder gangs, faster money, no reverence left. The Mafia was becoming an empire of headlines, not codes. And deep down, Joe knew his kind of rule, the calm, disciplined kind, was dying with him. He once built an empire on silence. Now, the silence itself was his legacy. The night before he died, Joe Profaci asked to be left alone. No priests, no doctors, no family, just the sound of the waves outside his window and the faint smell of olive oil drifting from the kitchen. He closed his eyes and whispered a final prayer, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. He had lived as both a man of God and a man of business, and somewhere in between, he built an empire that outlived him. Those who came after, men like Colombo and Gallo, would carry his shadow into the next generation of blood and betrayal. But none would rule like him. None would find peace and control the way he did. They said he died with a rosary in one hand, and a ledger in the other. To the world, he was the Godfather before the Godfather. To his family, he was simply a man who believed discipline could make sin look like virtue. In the end, he proved one thing: power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it prays. He outlived the world he built, not because he was lucky, but because he never broke his word. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gangster stories like this one.